I'm done holding on to the past. It burns on its own.
The smell hit me first, her perfume, thick enough to choke a horse, lingering in our bedroom at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. If Adrienne was trying to cover something up, she'd need a lot more than Chanel No. 5. I'm Jonah Finch, and I fix computers for a living. Not glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps me sharp. 20 years in this business teaches you to notice when things don't add up. Like tonight, when my wife of 12 years came home claiming she'd been at the law firm until 11, but her laptop bag was bone dry despite the torrential downpour that started at 9. Long night at the office? I asked, not looking up from the carburetor I was rebuilding at my basement workbench. My 1967 Mustang had been my therapy project for 3 years now. Longer than Adrienne had been acting strange, but not by much. You know how it is, she called down the stairs, her voice carrying that practiced exhaustion she'd perfected lately. The Morrison case is eliminating us all. Funny thing about being married to a lawyer, they're excellent liars until they get comfortable. Then they get sloppy. The Morrison case had settled 2 weeks ago. I knew because I'd fixed the senior partner's computer the day they celebrated. I wiped my hands on an old rag and climbed the stairs. Adrienne was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine with the focused intensity of someone who really needed it. Her blonde hair was perfect, not a strand out of place despite her supposed marathon work session. Her makeup was fresh too, which was interesting since she never touched up at the office. Rough day? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She startled, nearly dropping the wine glass. God, Jonah, you scared me. Sorry, thought you heard me coming up the stairs. I watched her face carefully. You seem jumpy. I'm just tired. She took a long sip of wine, avoiding eye contact. I'm going to take a bath and go to bed. Before dinner, I ate at the office. Another lie. Adrienne never ate at the office. She claimed the vending machine food would give her cancer, and the nearby restaurants were beneath her standards. But I didn't call her out. Not yet. I waited until I heard the bathroom door close and the water running before I made my move. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter, practically begging for attention. Inside, I found the usual suspects: wallet, keys, breath mints, and a receipt from Chez Laurent, the most expensive restaurant in the city. The timestamp read 8:11 p.m., table for 2. The water was still running upstairs when I powered up her laptop. Adrienne had always been careless with passwords. She used the same one for everything, our wedding date backwards. Romantic and predictable, just like our marriage had been until recently. Her browser history was a goldmine. Hotel websites, restaurant reservations, and a particularly interesting email thread with someone named GM. The messages were coded, but not cleverly. Can't wait for our conference next weekend, and the usual room weren't exactly cryptic. I scrolled through 3 months of lies, each one more elaborate than the last. Business trips that weren't business trips. Late nights that weren't at the office. Conferences that didn't exist. The bathroom door opened upstairs. I closed the laptop and slipped back down to my workshop, my mind racing. 23 years of marriage, 12 of them good ones, and this was what it came to. Snooping through my wife's computer like some paranoid husband in a bad movie. Except I wasn't paranoid anymore. I was informed. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. Adrienne bustled around the kitchen in her power suit, all efficiency and fake smiles, preparing for another day of legal brilliance and extracurricular activities. I'll be late tonight, she announced, not looking up from her phone. Client dinner. Which client? I asked, buttering my toast with deliberate slowness. The Patterson Group. You wouldn't know them. I knew them. They were a small accounting firm that barely generated enough billable hours to keep the lights on. Hardly the type to spring for expensive client dinners. But I just nodded and watched her leave, noting the extra makeup and the perfume cloud that followed her out the door. 20 minutes later, I was at Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar 6 blocks from our house that served as the unofficial headquarters for the city's blue-collar information network. Big Mike Kowalski held court at the far end of the bar, his massive frame draped over a stool that had probably been reinforcing its joints since the Clinton administration. Jonah, Mike boomed, raising his coffee mug in salute. Little early for drowning sorrows, isn't it? Information gathering, I said, sliding onto the adjacent stool. Need a favor? Mike had retired from the police force 5 years ago, but he still maintained connections throughout the city. More importantly, he had a talent for making people talk and a complete disregard for privacy when it came to cheating spouses. What kind of favor? He asked, suddenly serious. I slid him a piece of paper with a name and address. Greg Martin, real estate developer. I need to know everything about him. Mike studied the paper, then looked at me with the expression of a man who'd seen this movie before. This about Adrienne? Maybe. Jonah, buddy, if you're asking me to look into some guy, it's definitely about Adrian. He folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Give me 24 hours. I spent the rest of the day at my shop, fixing computers and planning my next moves. By 5 o'clock, I had a strategy. By 6, I was parked across the street from Adrian's law firm, watching the parking garage exit through binoculars I'd borrowed from my neighbor. She emerged at 6:47 p.m., but instead of heading home, she drove toward the upscale part of town. I followed at a distance, my old Mustang rumbling quietly through the evening traffic. She pulled into the valet station at Chez Laurent, the same restaurant from last night's receipt. I parked across the street and waited. 10 minutes later, a silver BMW pulled up, and out stepped a man in an expensive suit. Tall, dark hair, confident stride, everything I wasn't, according to Adrian's recent complaints about my lack of ambition. He handed his keys to the valet and disappeared into the restaurant. Greg Martin, I presumed. I took photos with my phone, lots of them. Greg arriving, Greg and Adrian embracing in the restaurant window, Greg's hand on the small of her back as they were seated. Each image felt like a small victory and a tiny knife wound simultaneously. They stayed for 2 hours. I stayed longer, watching them emerge, watching him kiss her goodbye in the parking lot, watching her check her appearance in her car mirror before driving home. By the time I got back to our house, I had enough evidence to confront her, but confrontation wasn't my goal. Revenge was. Thursday brought rain and revelations. Mike called at 8 a.m. with a voice full of barely contained glee. Your boy Greg is a piece of work, he said without preamble. Gregory Martin, 44 years old, married to Rebecca Martin for 15 years, 2 kids in private school, owns Martin Development Group, which has been cutting corners on city projects for the past 3 years. Cutting corners how? Substandard materials, bribed inspectors, the usual developer tricks. Nothing prosecutable yet, but the city's been watching him. More interesting is his personal life. This isn't his first affair. Word is, he's got a reputation for targeting married women, specifically lawyers and real estate agents. Likes the challenge, apparently. I felt my jaw clench. What else? He owns a penthouse downtown, officially listed as corporate housing, but really used for his extracurricular activities. Address is 147 Harbor View, top floor. Building has decent security, but nothing military grade. Military grade. Mike knew about my Army background, the 6 years I'd spent in intelligence before coming home to marry Adrian, and settle into civilian life. Skills I'd hoped never to use again, but life has a twisted sense of humor. Thanks, Mike, I owe you. You don't owe me anything. Just promise me you won't do anything stupid. Define stupid. Anything that gets you arrested. I'll be careful. I hung up and called my shop, telling my assistant I'd be out for the day. Then I drove to the other side of town, to a small apartment complex where my old Army buddy Tommy Red Sullivan lived with his computers and his paranoia. Red had been the best intelligence analyst in our unit, a genius with technology and information systems. Civilian life had been less kind to him. He'd bounced between tech jobs, unable to deal with corporate politics and normal social interactions. But he was still the best researcher I knew, and more importantly, he understood the value of discretion. Jonah Finch, he said, opening his door after I'd knocked for 5 minutes. This is unexpected. I need help, Red. Information gathering. His eyes lit up. Red lived for puzzles and problems, especially ones that required his particular skill set. What kind of information? I explained the situation without mentioning names. Red listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. So, you want to know everything about this guy, he said when I finished. Financial records, personal habits, business dealings, the works. Everything legal, I emphasized. I'm not asking you to hack anything. Of course not, Red said with a slight smile. Amazing what you can find through public records, social media analysis, and good old-fashioned detective work. Give me 48 hours. That evening, I waited for Adrienne to come home from her client dinner with the Patterson Group. She arrived at 10:30 p.m., slightly disheveled and smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. How was dinner? I asked from my position on the couch, not looking up from the television. Boring, she said quickly. Just contract negotiations and billable hour discussions. Sounds riveting. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, studying my profile. You seem different lately, Jonah. Distant. I finally looked at her, really looked at her. 12 years of marriage, and I was seeing a stranger. Do I? Yes, is everything okay? Everything's fine, Adrian, just tired. She nodded and headed upstairs, but I caught her watching me in the hallway mirror. Good. Let her wonder. Let her worry. The game was just beginning, and I intended to win. Saturday brought the annual Riverside Fall Festival, a citywide celebration that drew thousands of people to the downtown area. Food trucks, live music, craft vendors, and enough gossip to fuel a small town for months. It was also the perfect venue for what I had planned. Red had delivered his intelligence report Friday evening, a comprehensive dossier that painted Greg Martin as an even bigger dirtbag than I'd imagined. Tax problems, building code violations, 3 previous affairs that had ended badly, and a wife who apparently had no idea about any of it. But the most interesting detail was his pattern. Greg always brought his conquests to public events, showing them off like trophies before discarding them. According to Red's research, Greg and Adrian would be at the festival together. She'd told me she was spending the day with her sister in Boston, another lie to add to the growing collection. I arrived at the festival early, positioning myself near the main stage where the afternoon entertainment would take place. Mike joined me at noon, bringing coffee and a knowing grin. You sure about this? He asked, handing me a cup. Absolutely. Because once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. I passed the point of no return 3 days ago. At 1:47 p.m., they'd showed arrived. Greg looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, perfectly styled hair, designer casual wear, expensive sunglasses. Adrienne wore a sundress I'd never seen before, probably purchased specifically for this occasion. They walked hand in hand through the crowd, stopping at various booths, playing the happy couple for anyone who cared to notice. I followed at a distance, taking photos and waiting for the right moment. It came at 2:30 p.m., when they stopped at the wine tasting booth near the main stage. Greg was sampling a red wine while Adrienne chatted with the vendor, both of them relaxed and unguarded. I approached from behind, timing my arrival perfectly. Adrienne, I said loudly enough for nearby festival goers to hear. Fancy meeting you here. She spun around, her face going white. Greg looked confused, then concerned as he realized who I must be. Jonah, she stammered. What are you doing here? Enjoying the festival, I said pleasantly. You remember me mentioning it, right? Oh, wait, you were supposed to be in Boston today. With your sister. The wine vendor and several other people were now watching our little drama with undisguised interest. Adrienne's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I can explain, she started. I'm sure you can, I said. You've gotten very good at explanations lately. Very creative. I turned to Greg, extending my hand. You must be the client dinner. Or was it the conference? Hard to keep track. Greg didn't take my hand. Instead, he stepped slightly in front of Adrienne, a protective gesture that would have been touching under different circumstances. I think there's been a misunderstanding, he said. Oh, there's definitely been a misunderstanding, I agreed. But not the kind you think. I pulled out my phone and showed them both a photo from Wednesday night, the two of them kissing in the restaurant parking lot. See, I understood perfectly. Adrienne made a small sound somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. Greg's jaw tightened, and I could see him calculating his options. This is neither the time nor the place, he said quietly. You're absolutely right, I said. The time was 3 months ago, when you could have had the decency to end your marriage before starting something new. The place was our home, where honest conversations happened between honest people. By now, we had attracted a small crowd. Cell phones were appearing, and I could hear whispered conversations starting around us. In a city this size, news traveled fast, and scandal traveled faster. Jonah, please, Adrienne said, reaching for my arm. Now let's go home and talk about this privately. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. Privately? Like all those private client dinners, all those private conferences. I looked around at the growing audience. No, I think public is perfect. After all, you two haven't been shy about displaying your affection in public places. Greg finally found his voice. Look, friend, I understand you're upset, but making a scene isn't going to solve anything. Friend? I laughed. And it wasn't a pleasant sound. That's rich. And you're wrong about solving things. This is solving quite a lot, actually. I raised my voice slightly, ensuring everyone within 50 feet could hear clearly. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my wife, Adrian, and her boyfriend, Greg. They've been having such a wonderful time together over the past 3 months, sneaking around, lying to their spouses, treating marriage vows like suggestions. I thought you all should know what kind of people you're sharing this beautiful festival with. The crowd's murmur grew louder. I could see people pointing, phones recording, the gossip network activating in real time. Adrienne looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. Greg looked like he wanted to punch me. "You son of a witch," he growled, stepping closer. "Careful," I said quietly, my voice carrying just enough edge to remind him that I wasn't some soft suburban husband. "You're already the villain in this story. Don't make it worse." He stopped, something in my tone registering as dangerous. Smart man. I turned back to Adrian, who was now crying, whether from shame, anger, or genuine remorse, I couldn't tell and didn't care. "Enjoy the rest of the festival," I said. "I'm sure you'll find the atmosphere much more interesting now." I walked away, leaving them standing there in the wreckage of their public humiliation, surrounded by dozens of witnesses and at least 20 recording devices. Phase 1 was complete. Monday morning brought consequences. Adrian hadn't come home Sunday night, probably staying at a hotel or maybe even at Greg's penthouse. I didn't particularly care where she'd gone, but I was curious about what she'd do next. The answer came at 10:47 a.m. when she walked into my computer repair shop with Greg Martin in tow. They both looked like they'd had a rough weekend. Adrienne's usual perfect appearance was slightly frayed around the edges, and Greg had the hollow-eyed look of a man who'd been doing damage control for 48 hours straight. "We need to talk," Adrienne said without preamble. "Do we?" I looked up from the laptop I was working on, a machine belonging to Mrs. Patterson from the accounting firm. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I thought we covered everything at the festival." "You humiliated us," Greg said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "In front of half the city." "I revealed the truth in front of half the city," I corrected. "There's a difference, though I can see how you might confuse the two." "Look," Adrienne said, trying a different approach. "I know you're hurt, and you have every right to be, but what you did Saturday was cruel and unnecessary. Cruel and unnecessary." I repeated the words slowly, tasting them. Interesting choice of words. You know what I found cruel and unnecessary? 3 months of lies. 3 months of watching you come home smelling like another man and pretending everything was normal. 3 months of you treating me like an idiot while you played house with your boyfriend. Greg stepped forward. "She was going to tell you. We both were. We just needed time to figure out how to do it right." I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Time to figure out how to do it right? You've had 93 days. How much more time did you need?" "It's complicated," Adrienne said. "No, it's really not. You wanted to have your cake and eat it too. Keep the stable home life while enjoying your exciting new romance. The only complicated part was keeping track of all the lies." I stood up, closing the laptop with a sharp snap. Both of them took an involuntary step backward, which told me everything I needed to know about how much weekend damage control had accomplished. "But you know what?" I continued, walking around the counter to face them directly. "I should thank you both. Saturday was incredibly educational. I learned that my wife is a liar and a cheat, and that her boyfriend is a coward who lets women fight his battles for him. I also learned that the entire city now knows exactly what kind of people you are." "The whole city doesn't know," Greg said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Oh, but they do," I said pleasantly. "Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store called yesterday to ask if I needed anything. The barista at Coffee Corner gave me a free drink and a sympathetic smile this morning. My mailman asked if I was holding up okay. Trust me, Greg, the whole city knows." Adrienne was crying again, but these tears looked more calculated than the ones from Saturday. "Jonah, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. Try to rebuild." "Rebuild what?" I interrupted. "Our marriage? The one you've been systematically destroying for 3 months? The one where you lie to my face every single day?" "I never meant for it to happen," she said. "It just did. Bees." The word came out harder than I'd intended, but I didn't apologize. "Affairs don't just happen, Adrienne. They're a series of choices. You chose to meet him. You chose to have dinner with him. You chose to lie to me about where you were going and what you were doing. You chose to sleep with him. Every single step was a choice, and you made the wrong one every single time." Greg finally found his backbone. "Look, we get it. You're angry. You want to punish us? Fine, you've done that. But this has gone far enough. Has it? I asked. Because from where I'm standing, it feels like we're just getting started. Something in my tone must have registered as dangerous, because Greg's posture shifted slightly, his weight moving to the balls of his feet. Military training dies hard, and I could see him preparing for a physical confrontation. Are you threatening us? He asked. I'm stating a fact, I replied calmly. You both seem to think that because you've been exposed, the worst is over. That now we'll all sit down like civilized adults and work out some kind of arrangement that lets everyone save face. But here's the thing. I'm not feeling particularly civilized right now. I moved closer, close enough that Greg had to make a choice between standing his ground and backing down. He chose to stand his ground, which I respected even as I prepared to make him regret it. You want to know what I'm going to do? I asked quietly. I'm going to make sure that everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of man you are, Greg. Every client, every business partner, every person who might consider doing business with you. I'm going to make sure your wife finds out about every affair you've had, not just this one. I'm going to make sure the building inspectors take a very close look at every project you've ever worked on. His face went pale. You can't prove anything, can I? I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. You'd be amazed what you can prove when you put your mind to it, especially when you have friends who know how to dig up information. I turned to Adrian. And you, dear wife, are going to discover that actions have consequences. Your law firm partners are very concerned about their reputation, and having an associate who's become the subject of citywide gossip isn't good for business, especially when that associate has been using firm resources to conduct her personal affairs. What are you talking about? She asked, but her voice was shaky. Company car, company credit card, company time. All documented, all traceable, all grounds for immediate termination. I wasn't bluffing. Red had found the paper trail, and it was damning. You fool, Greg snarled, finally losing his composure completely. Maybe, I agreed, but I'm an honest fool, which is more than either of you can claim. He lunged at me then, which was exactly what I'd been hoping for. 20 years of civilian life hadn't erased 6 years of military training, and Greg Martin was a real estate developer, not a fighter. I sidestepped his clumsy charge, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum to slam him face first into the counter. Greg! Adrian screamed. I kept him pinned with minimal effort, his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that was uncomfortable but not damaging. Here's some free advice, Greg, I said conversationally. Next time you decide to sleep with someone's wife, make sure her husband isn't someone who knows 17 different ways to break your arm. Let him go, Adrian pleaded. In a minute. I leaned closer to Greg's ear. Are we clear on how this is going to work? You're going to stay away from my wife, stay away from me, and start looking for a new city to do business in. Because if I see you again, if I even hear that you've been in the same room as Adrian, I'm going to stop being nice about this. I released him and stepped back. Greg straightened up slowly, rubbing his wrist and glaring at me with undisguised hatred. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is, I replied. You just don't know it yet. They left without another word. Greg's expensive suit wrinkled, and his dignity in tatters, Adrian following behind like a lost puppy. I watched them through the window as they got into Greg's BMW and drove away, probably to plan their next move. Let them plan. I was already 3 moves ahead. The end came on a Wednesday, exactly 1 week after my confrontation with Adrian and Greg at my shop. I'd spent the intervening days putting the final pieces in place, making phone calls, sending emails, and watching the dominoes I'd carefully arranged begin to fall. Adrian had moved out of our house on Monday, taking only her clothes and personal items. She didn't ask for anything else, probably because she knew she had no legal or moral claim to it. The house was mine, bought with my money before we were married. The car was mine, registered in my name. Even the furniture was mine, purchased during my bachelor years or inherited from my parents. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter, a pathetic attempt at explanation and apology that I'd thrown away without reading completely. Too little, too late, and far too self-serving. Greg, meanwhile, was discovering that reputation mattered in a small city. 3 major clients had terminated their contracts with Martin Development Group, citing concerns about leadership stability. The city had announced a comprehensive review of all his projects, focusing on building code compliance and safety standards. His wife had filed for divorce and taken the kids to her mother's house in Portland. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Wednesday evening found me parked across the street from Greg's penthouse building, watching and waiting. Red's intelligence had been thorough. Greg's routine, his habits, his security measures. At 7:30 p.m., exactly as predicted, Greg's BMW pulled into the building's parking garage. I gave him 10 minutes to get settled, then made my move. The building's security was decent, but not exceptional. A keycard reader at the main entrance, cameras in the lobby and elevators, a night security guard who spent most of his time watching television. Nothing I couldn't handle with the right preparation and timing. I'd spent 2 days studying the building's layout and security patterns. The guard took his dinner break at 8 p.m. every night, leaving the lobby unattended for 30 minutes. The keycard reader could be bypassed if you knew which wires to cross. Knowledge I'd acquired during my Army intelligence days and refreshed through some creative research. At 8:03 p.m., I was inside the building, riding the elevator to the penthouse floor. Greg's apartment was at the end of the hall, behind a door that probably cost more than most people's cars. I knocked politely and waited. "Who is it?" Greg's voice came through the intercom, wary and suspicious. "Building maintenance," I said, disguising my voice slightly. "We've got a water leak in the unit below you. Need to check your bathroom for damage." There was a pause, then the sound of locks being disengaged. The door opened, and Greg Martin found himself face to face with his worst nightmare. "Hello, Greg," I said pleasantly. "We need to talk." He tried to slam the door, but I was already moving, my foot blocking the threshold and my shoulder driving forward. Greg stumbled backward as I entered his sanctuary, his face pale with shock and fear. "Get out," he said, backing toward the living room. "I'm calling the police." "Well, go ahead," I said, closing the door behind me and engaging the locks. "Tell them how the husband of the woman you've been sleeping with came to have a conversation with you. I'm sure they'll be very sympathetic." The penthouse was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive, sterile, and designed for seduction rather than comfort. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city, while leather furniture and abstract art completed the bachelor pad aesthetic. "What do you want?" Greg asked, his voice trying for authority but achieving only nervousness. "Justice," I said simply. "You destroyed my marriage, humiliated me in front of my friends and neighbors, and turned my wife into a liar and a cheat. Now it's time to pay the price." "I didn't destroy anything," he said, gaining confidence as the conversation continued without immediate violence. "Your marriage was already broken, or Adrian never would have looked elsewhere." "Maybe," I conceded, "but that was between Adrian and me. You had no right to interfere, no right to pursue a married woman, and no right to turn our private problems into your personal entertainment." I walked to the windows, looking out at the city lights below. "Nice view," I commented. "Must be expensive to maintain a place like this." "Very expensive," Greg agreed, probably wondering where I was going with this. "Too bad you won't be able to afford it much longer." His confusion was evident. "What are you talking about?" I turned back to face him, pulling a manila envelope from my jacket pocket. "This contains copies of financial records, building inspection reports, and sworn statements from 3 of your former mistresses. Turns out you have a pattern, Greg. Married women, elaborate seductions, promises you never intend to keep. Very interesting reading." "You can't have those records," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Public information mostly," I said. "Amazing what you can find when you know where to look and who to ask." The rest came from women who were very eager to share their experiences once they learned they weren't alone. I tossed the envelope onto his coffee table. "The financial records show some creative accounting practices that the IRS might find interesting. The inspection reports document building code violations that could result in criminal charges. And the statements from your former lovers establish a pattern of behavior that your wife's divorce attorney will find very useful." Greg's face had gone completely white. "What do you want?" "I want you gone," I said, "like out of this city, out of this state, out of my life. I want you to disappear so completely that in 6 months, people will have trouble remembering your name. And if I don't, then copies of everything in that envelope go to the IRS, the district attorney, your wife's lawyer, and every major newspaper in the region. Your business will be destroyed, your marriage will be over, and you'll probably be facing criminal charges." He stared at the envelope like it was a poisonous snake. "You can't prove half of this." "I don't have to prove it," I said. "I just have to raise enough questions to make your life unbearable. Investigations take time, Greg. Years sometimes. And even if you're eventually cleared of wrongdoing, your reputation will never recover. I moved closer, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. But here's the thing. I'm not interested in destroying you completely. I'm interested in removing you from my life. Leave town, start over somewhere else, and we never have to see each other again. Stay here and I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. This is blackmail, he said weakly. This is justice, I corrected. You had choices, Greg. You could have pursued single women, divorced women, women who were free to make their own decisions without betraying anyone. Instead, you chose to target married women, to interfere in other people's lives for your own gratification. Now you get to live with the consequences. I headed for the door, then paused it with my hand on the locks. Oh, and Greg, stay away from Adrienne. Whatever you think you have with her, it's over. She's poison now, and you're smart enough to know it. I left him standing in his expensive penthouse, surrounded by the wreckage of his carefully constructed life, holding an envelope that contained the power to destroy everything he'd built. 3 days later, Martin Development Group announced it was ceasing operations in the city and relocating to Florida. Greg Martin was nowhere to be found, having apparently left town in the middle of the night without telling anyone, including Adrienne. She called me that Saturday crying and begging me to tell her where he'd gone. I hung up without saying a word. 2 weeks after that, Adrienne was terminated from her law firm for misuse of company resources and conduct unbecoming a member of the bar. She moved back in with her parents in Ohio, her legal career effectively over. I kept the house, kept my business, and kept my dignity. The city's gossip network moved on to other scandals, but people still remembered. They remembered that Jonah Finch wasn't someone to be trifled with, that actions had consequences, and that sometimes justice came from unexpected sources. I never saw Greg Martin again. I never spoke to Adrienne again. And I never regretted a single moment of what I'd done. Some people might call it revenge. I called it setting things right. In the end, that's all that mattered.